Welcome back, everyone.
Thank you.
It's now 2:30 and we shall resume the inquiry. Just to check, Mr. Village, is your hand up from previously, or did you have a point? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, ma'am. I'll introduce to the inquiry Mr. Jameson Hodgson. You are Jameson Hodgson, is that correct?
It is, Mr. Barrett. You're not on my screen, though. I don't know if you could turn your camera on.
Mr. Village is on our screen, but not Mr. Barrett.
There we go.
Mr. Village, would you like to turn your camera on?
I thought I had turned it on, but there you go. You're a director of Memorial Limited. You've been engaged in the crematoria business for some 12 years, and you've helped to grow Memoria by leading the planning team to secure planning permissions to build new crematoria and cemeteries. Since 2011, you've managed to secure 14 planning consents, 5 of which were on appeal. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Your personal background is from 1.3. You're a demographic expert, having prepared several need assessments across different industries. When you joined Memoria in 2009, you brought GIS technology into the process in order to better understand the way that quantitative and qualitative need and financial viability is measured in crematoria development. Is all that correct?
That's correct.
1.7, you present your evidence. It represents your professional opinion on matters of quantitative and quantitative need. It's based on your knowledge and understanding of the issues. You believe the facts stated in the evidence are true and accurate. All that so?
Yes.
Would you go to page 24 of your evidence? 24. On the electronic version, it's 27, where you have a summary conclusion. Now, I'm going to take all your evidence as read. People have had it now for some little time. But there are a few key points in your summary and conclusions that I'll invite you to read. And then I'm going to ask you some specific questions in an attempt to identify the differences between you and Mr. Best, Memoria, if you like, and the appellant. So if you go to paragraph 9.6 of the summary and conclusions, page 24.
Yes.
I don't think we need to go to the map. People will have seen it in any event, where you refer to minimum distance catchment. This equates to over 120,000 people. This is a catchment area size which falls below any of the previously consented schemes within open countryside. You use the expression minimum distance catchment. The appellants use a different expression. Are they the same?
Yes, I believe the appellant refers to them as natural catchment areas, so NCA. So I think we can say that NCA and MDC, for the purposes of the inspector, are the same.
Can I ask you to read 9.9 through to 9.12, please? This is the Western Arc issue.
There is a significant reliance throughout the appellant's case that the appeal site would significantly reduce pressure on the western arc of crematoria, including Barnsley and Rotherham. As one can see from table 3.1, the appeal site would have a small impact on these catchment areas. I assessed the resulting impact on each of the site's capacity in section 5 of this proof. In terms of trying to understand the appeal site's limited impact on Barnsley Crematorium in particular, something which the appellant heavily relies upon in both their original needs statement and their appeal statement of case, this is purely down to location. Crucially, Barnsley Crematorium sits to the east of the town, meaning that a significant proportion of the population that the crematorium serves sits to the west of their site. This is one of the major reasons why the appeal scheme has a far lower impact on that crematorium than it does on Rose Hill. This reaffirms the view that the appeal site is in the wrong location to support capacity issues in Barnsley, Pontefract and Rotherham. Future death rate increases and population growth, particularly at Barnsley, Rotherham and Pontefract, is cited as a supporting argument for the appellant throughout their original needs statement. Table 3.2 clearly demonstrates that the impacts of the appeal scheme on surrounding crematoria do not change significantly based on future projections.
And if I'm bringing you forward to 917, paragraph 917 at the bottom of page 25 here, read 917, it's a comment really upon the location of the appeal scheme.
More crucially, as outlined in paragraph 3.11 of this proof, the appeal scheme is located on the edge of the urban area of Doncaster, whereas it is significantly further away from the centres of population, which are currently served by Barnsley, Pontefract and Rotherham. This is further evidenced in map 4.2.
And just carry on at 919, the comment on the map, please.
This map clearly shows that the 30-minute cortege drive time of the appeal site does not cover the main centres of population that are currently serviced by Barnsley, Pontefract and Rotherham. This is why it is flawed for the appellant to suggest that the appeal site is well positioned to reduce pressure on each of these crematoria.
Now I'd like you to consider the population issues 920 through to 922, please.
Map 4.1 shows that there is not a significant population that currently reside over 30 minutes away from their nearest crematorium that would be located within 30 minutes of the proposed appeal site. And ma'am, this is often referred to as the unique 30-minute drive time in past appeal decisions. 9.21, as you can see in tables 6.1 and 6.2 of the active exchange report, this only amounts to 21,493 people based on 2021 and 22,611 people based on 2033 projections. This ultimately shows that the level of quantitative and quantifiable qualitative need for the appeal scheme is low, lower than past appeal decisions which have defined need for crematoria development in the open countryside. This, coupled with the flawed locational restraints and supporting capacity issues at other neighbouring sites, mean that there is little quantitative need evidence to justify development in the Greenbelt.
At the bottom of page 26, then you referred to broad agreement in paragraph 9.25, broad agreement in relation to the understanding of core slot and peak month capacity being an important consideration. At 927, I think there's a typographical error embedded in there, but the point that's being made at 927 is that direct cremations should be excluded from any calculation. Is that correct?
Yes, apologies, it is a typographical error. It should say that all direct cremations should be excluded. There is an erroneous 4 words in there where it says explain that one is cremations. That should all come out. So apologies, ma'am, for that.
And just read then 928 through to 930, please.
Based on 2021 figures, Memoria has factored in the likely capacity usage at all the surrounding crematoria of this area with Barnby Dun constructed. This shows that Rose Hill is performing comfortably under capacity once Barnby Dun is operational, even based on the peak month calculation. Even though slot capacity remains comfortable, Barnsley, Rotherham and Pontefract are all over 80% trading for practical core capacity and peak month core capacity. Barnby Dun and Rose Hill still sit comfortably as operating under capacity on all fronts, whilst Barnsley, Rotherham and Pontefract remain above 80% trading for core capacity. The increases over the 12-year period are only between 2 and 5%. Consequently, the situation does not appear to get significantly worse.
You draw the threads together. If you go to your paragraph 9.34, it's a short point. You describe it as such. Can you read that, please?
In short, the appeal proposal was purposefully located to support Doncaster and the facility at Rose Hill. However, the consent at Barnby Dun has already reduced that capacity pressure to below 80% on slot, core and peak month core capacity.
And finally, there's a qualitative issue about the replacement up-to-date state-of-the-art facilities. Will you read 9.36, please?
The appellant states that local crematoria to the appeal scheme are old and outdated, and as such, a new state-of-the-art facility at the appellant's site will significantly address the residual qualitative need in this area. This is an approach that cannot be maintained given the appeal site will only be located 10 kilometres from a brand new state-of-the-art facility at Barnby Dun.
And all the threads together, 946 through to 948, please.
When the appellant submitted their planning application at the appeal site in December 2019, there was clearly a quantitative and qualitative need for a new crematorium in the north of Doncaster. That need has largely been satisfied by the consent at Barnby Done. This is demonstrated and underpinned by the figures in the MDC 30-minute cortege drive time and capacity analysis presented in this proof in sections 3, 4 and 5. Thank
you very much. Now, number of differences between you and Mr. Best. One matter raised by Mr. Best in his rebuttal concerns the use of GIS software, something I know that you have some experience of. Can you just tell us what the difference is between the software that's been used by both parties here and why there is a memoria preference for the software it uses?
Yes, Ma'am, there is a fundamental difference insofar as we use two different GIS providers. The appellant uses ArcGIS for their purposes of their proof of evidence. I believe they used another system for the actual planning application. ArcGIS is a system we know well, insofar as we used to use it. We made the switch over to another system called Map Info Professional, which largely, does similar things to ArcGIS, but fundamentally, the major reason for our movement away from it is that there is a manual override to exclude motorways with ArcGIS that makes those results a little bit more unreliable, shall we say, because you actually have to manually change the speeds to make sure that the traffic is diverted. With Map Info Professional, you can actually exclude and take out the opportunity to use the motorways, which we do because we say that funeral corteges don't use motorways, and as a result, it would give a false reading in certain situations. Bearing in mind that that we like the appellant build new crematoria, and we want the figures to be as accurate as possible. There should be a 98% similarity between the two softwares, though. And I note from looking at the diversions that exist in Mr. Best's proof that there is a greater difference than 98%. Within our proof and within the Appendix 1 of my proof, the active exchange report, there is a complete breakdown of the speeds that we use, which is completely transparent, so that you know that you're comparing like with like. I'm unable to test that with Mr. Best's proof. Now, I'm not saying anything about those speeds that are used, but again, I'm unable to tell you what the differences are and why they're more than that 2% difference that I would expect them to be.
Are you confident in the accuracy of the software that you've used and the speeds that are displayed in Appendix 1 of your evidence?
Yes, ma'am, I am, and I am because it's the same software that we used at Barnby Done to justify development of a crematorium. It's the same software and the same methodology, the same speeds that we have used at every appeal scheme that we have used, and it's the same speeds that we used when we were using the ArcGIS software. So yes, I'm fully confident in the speeds that are provided in my proof of evidence.
Next issue, I think, between you and Mr. Best is direct cremation rate. Mr. Best uses different direct cremation rate from yourself. Can you just explain where you are in terms of the future direct cremation rate and the differences between you and Mr. Best?
Certainly. Ma'am, we use, Mr. Best and the appellant use a 3.14% current day direct cremation rate and an 11% future direct cremation rate, because they make an adjustment for what they deem to be hybrid cremations, which I note you asked Mr. Mitchell a question about. I'm not going to get into a contesting of the hybrid element of that, but what I have quoted is direct cremation rate, to be clear, and we've quoted an 11.52% rate in the current day, so significantly more than the 3.14%. And then we've projected a 20% direct cremation rate in 2033. Now, our current direct cremation rate across our group of crematoria is set at 28%. And I've actually outlined how that has increased in Appendix 5 of my proof of evidence. We've done that because that is what we've seen. We are a national provider of direct cremation, so I think it's fair to assume that our direct cremation rates would be higher than a normal crematorium. So instead of trying to impose our rates, we've taken the 11.52% rate, which is actually the direct cremation rate from all crematoria in England that recorded direct cremations in 2020. We therefore believe that that is a robust rate because direct cremation is a relatively new phenomenon, and as a result, a lot of crematoria haven't got used to recording it properly yet. We believe that they will, and that it will continue to rise. The future rate we've set at 20%. Now, given that this is 13 years' time, and we are already at 28% direct cremation, we think that presents a very conservative rate, but we wanted it to be conservative because we don't know, truthfully, how far direct cremation will go. I would point out, though, that the dignity, or I should say, apologies, the appellant's prediction at 2034 is less than the current national average for crematoria that record it. I would also note that the appellant has placed major focus on direct cremation in their more recent positioning on the subject, having spent a significant amount of money on advertising for direct cremation over the last 18 months, 61% of their advertising campaign across their entire group. So I think it's difficult for me to believe that they believe that in 13 years' time, something that's taking so much of their attention will only equate to 11% of their services.
The next issue, very recently, Mr. Mitchell was cross-examined on this issue, is the cremation rate.
Yes.
The appellant believe that the rate of 80% will increase to 85% by 2034. Is that a view that you would share?
We don't share it. In our rebuttal proof, we outline why. There is a movement that has seen an increase in cremation rate over the course of the last 50 years, as was well outlined by Mr. Village in his cross-examination to Mr. Mitchell. But in reality, that rate, we believe, is going to plateau. Why? Because there is a move towards green burial and green ecological understanding of people's choices. We believe that that will bring the cremation rate to a halt in terms of its increases. We also outline, as Mr. Mitchell did, that there are various religious tendencies that will prevent the cremation rate from going over a certain level in any case. So we believe the conservative thing to do is to set it at 80%. Now, just as a form of evidence to show that we believe that, in all of my assessments for 2034 in my own planning application at Barnby Dun and at all the other applications that we have done over the last stretch of time, we've also gone for 80% in 2034. So I am being consistent, even though I'm afraid I don't agree with the appellant's position on the subject.
Okay. The appellant refers to rebalancing, and in particular that exercise is not conducted. First of all, will you explain what your understanding of rebalancing is, and then how it is treated by Memoria in its evidence?
Yes, I mean, rebalancing is which is nicely defined by Mr. Best in his proof of evidence at 10.1. He actually, I won't quote it because I don't have the quote in front of me, but he effectively states that rebalancing is a process of taking account of the impact of a new crematorium facility and assessing what level of cremations that site will do, while also seeing what effect it will have as it establishes itself on all other neighbouring crematoria facilities. Now, we do that in sections 3 of my proof, insofar as our methodology of rebalancing is to take 100% of the MDC catchment area for each crematorium that exists in the locality. That is how we rebalance. Now, what we don't do is the rebalance that is characterised by the Wergs decision. Now, I couldn't find any proper breakdown of that methodology in Mr. Best's brief. And so I was very grateful for Mr. Village's closing statement at the Wergs appeal, which actually does outline it. And what it says is that you take 100% of the MDC. So they agree with us, they take 100%, but then they go further than that. They say that because of the qualitative factors of it being a new crematorium going up against another crematorium that's overtrading, that you can take an additional 50% of the population that sits beyond the fringe of that minimum distance catchment, but within a 12.9 journey time of that fringe on the outer edge. So they're taking 100% of their MDC and then they're adding 50% of a 12.9 radius in addition to that. To me, that is not a correct way of resetting a number of projections for cremation. And the reason I say that is that I think when you take 100% of an MDC, you're already taking 100% of it. And that's a lot to take, because what you will know, Ma'am, is that you won't take 100% of every funeral that takes place in your MDC. You will lose some because people will go back to where they know. They may even live in a completely different area. And bearing in mind, you're taking 100% of all the deaths that occur. So you'll never get 100%, but the appellant are right that you will take some from outside. And we do, because we assess performance across all of our operational 11 crematoria on this basis. And it's interesting because we have different levels of performance that range between around 85% and 131% across our 11 sites of that MDC. So that's taking no account of any further rebalancing. That's just looking at how we perform, being a brand new facility, going up against overtrading older facilities all over the country. And we've got as high as 131% in one location, and our average across our entire group is 107%. But the point is that we've got 2 or 3 that sit between 80 and 95%. So they're not even at that 100% level. I think the point that you take from this from a planning perspective is that you're not able to do that with any accuracy whatsoever. And if you read paragraph 10.49 of Mr. Best's proof of evidence, he actually says, a direct quote, that it is not possible to accurately forecast crematorium choices using criteria other than convenience. So I agree with him. So I find that the rebalancing exercise, as defined in the Wergs decision from the Secretary of State, I accept that the Wergs decision incidentally did adopt that, but my position as an operator of crematoria is that that is not an accurate way of doing anything, because you cannot accurately say what people will do. It's interesting though, because I think over a certain point, you can say that you will take some from outside, but doing it with any accuracy is next to impossible.
Is the Wergs decision analogous in circumstances where there is already the introduction of a new state-of-the-art facility? Was that the position in the Wergs and other decisions?
The position in Wergs and Essington is interesting because effectively you've got 2 new crematoria either side of an older overcapacity crematorium in Wolverhampton. You've got Wergs, which is sitting to the west of the conurbation of Wolverhampton, and you've got Essington, which is sitting approximately 5 miles to the east, but again, close, but on the other side, crucially, of the existing overcapacity crematorium. The reason I believe the Secretary of State accepted rebalancing in that case is because the proximity of all three crematoria were incredibly close. And if you just took an MDC, you would have had a lot of additional people that would have been well within a 30-minute drive time of each facility. So therefore, when you're looking at three crematoria in such close proximity, you can almost understand why rebalancing was adopted. But this is not the case in this appeal. It's a completely different set of circumstances. And as a result, as I said, for the reasons that I've already outlined about the irrationality of adopting rebalancing from an operator's perspective, I stand by that in terms of you, Ma'am, looking at this as, again, a completely different position from this appeal. Because I would say that it is not a universal application. It is an application that was accepted at one very specific set of circumstances.
Okay, another, well, I believe that Memoria have done it, but I don't think Mr. Best, maybe for reasons he doesn't consider it particularly relevant, how the 30-minute catchment of the appeal scheme identifies some 21,000 people. Shall I say this for the first time? Is that a relevant consideration?
I think it is, Ma'am. I think you have to look at the unique 30-minute drive time based on cortege speed. I have always adopted that because I believe it shows a genuine position of a gap in service in terms of journey time for bereaved families. Because effectively what you're saying is you're placing a crematorium before you get into loads of tables about capacity, about usage, about projections. You're ultimately saying that there are this number of people that currently are not properly serviced by a crematorium, and we're going to put a location together that actually fulfills a gap in service that currently exists. So in this case, we do that measure, and it's 21,000 people. Mr. Best says in section 5 of his proof that he doesn't like it as a measure, doesn't think it does enough because you need to look at death rates and capacity and projections based on those aspects, because ultimately usage isn't attached to population figures. I accept that. I think that's a fair position for Mr. Best to take when he's thinking about capacity. But when he's thinking about genuine need and gap in service, it's a very relevant position that needs to be properly looked at and assessed. And we do, and it's a low assessment. And again, I think when we go on to talk about other appeal decisions, we'll see that it's a very low amount when you try and compare it with other sites that have classified a quantifiable qualitative need.
Then I want to turn to the issue of capacity. You've already explained a moment ago the Memoria approach using 100% of the minimum distance catchment. The appellant's approach, of course, is different. They're using a capacity analysis that takes on board the average cremation rates that have taken place historically. Do you accept that that's a robust approach to assessment of capacity?
I don't, Ma'am, because I think, look, we use a consistent approach in assessing diversion or rebalancing, whichever terminology we want to use. And we take that approach using the GIS system. So you can completely underpin it with data. What I can't see in Mr. Best's proof, and again, that's because it's not appended to his proof, is a total breakdown of those diversions. So it's difficult for me to correlate them. But in terms of the capacity, we use the 100% MDC as the basis. Once we've done that, we have as accurate as you could possibly be of who will use those sites based on location and convenience alone. What the appellant does, obviously, they don't do this with capacity and rebalancing, but I'm not able to look at their diversions with any understanding because, again, it's not underpinned. But on top of that, they use a 2017 to 2019 average figure of actual cremations undertaken at the sites. And then they apply a diversion, presumably using GIS, but again, not classified how that map was created. And then they use effectively that base figure as the figure that they go on to use when looking at future projections. You'll note that Mr. Village took Mr. Mitchell to this 16.4% increase between 2019 and 2034. And Mr. Mitchell accepted that. I don't, because there is a more accurate way of doing it. If you draw an MDC around the sites, you have a completely understandable base of what we believe that the capacity will look like post the opening of another site. And you're able then to actually pinpoint the death rate projections in those specific areas, rather than taking an average of 16.4%, which is the sub-Yorkshire area as a whole. And so then you're able effectively to see that impact across the board in each individual area. And you're then able effectively to assess your capacity accordingly. That is why there are differences between the capacity analysis that we set out and the one that Mr. Best sets out. But again, we believe that the baseline that we use is more transparent and therefore more accurate.
In another area of dispute, Mr. Best draws upon other decision matters, and in his proof of evidence, I'm not sure if it's a criticism, it's an observation certainly, that you appear to exclude or ignore relevant appeal decisions in circumstances where there's more than one crematorium serving overlapping catchments. Can you just explain what your position is in respect of the utility of using previous appeal decisions in the manner suggested by Mr. Best?
Well, Ma'am, we use appeal decisions, as you've seen. I think we try and use it to try and quantify need any way we can. And I think the only way to do that is to look at, again, capacity and population levels. I do find that a lot of the measures that I used when we were going in more rural areas for filling gaps in service, like catchment areas and unique 30-minute drive times, have been replaced somewhat when more private developers were competing with one another over quite smaller spaces. So, for example, in South Staffordshire, you had the 4 applications, of which Worgs and Essington were 2. And as a result of that, you've got a setup really where I'm not trying to get too specific with the appeal decisions, because I think that everyone needs to be treated on their own merits. So I try and pluck out any precedent that can be used. But in terms of the 3 permissions or 3 appeals that Mr. Best directs me to in his criticism of our statement of case in section 11 of his proof, he asked me to look at Worgs, Essington and Huntingdon. Now, Huntingdon is not a core document, Ma'am, so I apologise for even talking about it in a sense, but it was raised as a criticism or a point of difference in Mr. Best's proof. And as a result of that, I did look at the Huntingdon decision, which I would just note the following, that it was an open countryside site that was close by to a recently consented site, only 1.7 miles apart. And it was consented for the appellant. But I would note this on need. It wasn't contested on need, owing to the fact that the site was in open countryside and that there were no policy requirement to demonstrate need in the open countryside area that it was in. And if you want to look up that decision, Ma'am, later, it's paragraph 48 of that decision letter that confirms that point.
Sorry to interrupt. Would it be acceptable to the parties to have that sort of put into the court documents? It would certainly seem
yes,
to be
ma'am.
referred to.
I'm going to arrange that. I was going to suggest that at the end of examination, Chief. I know, well, I would anticipate that all the main parties have it, so it's obviously unfair that you don't. So we'll arrange for that. Ask Mr. Mitra to send a copy.
I think it's actually already in H24.
Apologies, Mr. Rich. H24.
Let me just have a quick look. Has that been recently added, Mr. Village? Is that one of the ones that's...
No.
H24. Thank you, Ma'am. So paragraph 48 of core document H24. You'll see the quote that I've just come into. In terms of the Works and Essington position, I've already outlined the differences. What I would say is that every Greenbelt case needs to be determined particularly on its own merits, particularly when you're looking at need. We have, again, Memoria have had only one refusal, which related to a Greenbelt site, where we had a catchment area of over 200,000 catchment and over 100,000 unique catchment. And that didn't pass the very special circumstances test in that case. That is the Halstead appeal, which I believe is also in the core documents. Orchard Barn, I believe it's called. Apologies, I don't have the core document reference. But the point being that in terms of the appeal sites that I'm taken to by Mr. Best, every site needs to be treated on its own merits. And my position is this, that if you are to look at other appeals, core document H19, the appeal at Weeting, for me, made by the appellant in Open Countryside, is the one that I draw the most interesting aspect from, where the same team that the appellant has at this appeal, Mr. Best, Mr. Williams and Mr. Kirkpatrick, presented evidence on need, visual impact and planning evidence, with Mr. Best using the same capacity, rebalancing and general qualitative need theories before this inquiry. I would note that, Ma'am, in that appeal, despite the site in this case showing a unique 30-minute drive time, which was measured there, of 61 to 63,000 people, 3 times the amount shown for this appeal, the inspector, Mr. Guy Davis, concluded that the need demonstrated was limited. Paragraph 21 of that appeal decision, and the appeal was dismissed. Okay. So I don't think it's possible. I still invite you, Ma'am, to look at everything on its own merits, but the appeal decisions that I'm directed to by Mr. Best do nothing to change my view on the need before you.
And finally, although we did it briefly by reference to your summary, just could you give the inspector an overview of how you would invite her conclusions in respect of quantitative and qualitative need for the appeal scheme post Barnaby Dunn?
Well, Ma'am, it's certain that there was a strong need case for the appeal site and the appeal scheme when it was before the planning committee and no other sites were consented around it, because there was a genuine gap in service. So a lot of those measures that I've just quoted as being low would have been a lot higher. The inconvenient truth for the appellant is that the location was set by that original intention to fulfil a gap in service and a qualitative need in the north of Doncaster. The consent at Barnaby Dunn has largely satisfied that need. I do accept that there is a low level of residual need. I do accept that. But what I say to you is that the reliance on the Western Arc, which is now the focus of the appellant in trying to cope with the consent at Barnby Dun, insofar as it changes their need position that was originally submitted. The problem for that is that the location of the site is set too far away from any individual one of those sites. And as a result, they have limited impact on reducing the capacity pressure that all three parties have agreed that those three crematoria face. The unfortunate position for the appellant is that they can't move their location that was initially to serve a different area primarily. And as a result of that position, we are now in a situation where that gap cannot be filled in the location that's before you and before this appeal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hodgson. I've got no further questions of you. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett and Mr. Hodgson. Right, okay. Just if I could have Mr. Robson and Mr. Village back, please, just to discuss where we go from here in terms of the timetable. I mean, I tend to agree with Mr. Barrett. I think it would be unreasonable for Mr. Hodgson to be held over till Tuesday, and I'm sure the advocates would agree with that if that was their own witness. So it's unfortunate that we're going to lose some time this afternoon. Mr. Village, you need to go at 4:30 anyway, so that would help you. But I think you know, it would be an appropriate time to adjourn the inquiry this afternoon if all parties are agreed. Just looking at the timetable, we have had the revised timescales for the from the various parties. So what I shall do is have a look at those and produce a revised timetable on that basis. I think it would take a miracle to finish the inquiry within you know, so by next week, to be honest. So I think we have to accept at least 1 or 2 additional days. But we'll see how we get on. I'm ever the eternal optimist, so you never know. So I'll revise that and send that out on Monday. I also had the revised site visit itinerary, which seems more logical in terms of the route around that. So I'll have a look at that and possibly add in any additional things that I would like to see from the landscape and visual impact assessment evidence, which I've heard. And I think that probably concludes what I want to say. Are there any other sort of procedural matters that participants would like to draw to my attention before we adjourn for today? No.
Not for me, ma'am. Thank you.
I'm sure I'll think of something after we're finished. But yeah, I think it's probably a good time to adjourn. So just to thank everyone for their contributions this week. It's been quite a long week, and hope everyone has an enjoyable weekend. And we shall adjourn until 9:30 on Tuesday. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.